The idea of having a horse roaming a 3D environment was so impactful that Kazumi created a concept of a 3D horse running in a field. Just a 3D horse running in an empty field. After viewing this concept, the team knew they had to have a horse in the game. They wanted to keep the controls simple, so they had the horse auto-jump over obstacles when it gained enough speed. Epona would run as she pressed forward on the analog stick, but would get a burst of speed if Link fed her a carrot. However, if you ran out of carrots, she slowed down until they refilled automatically over time. But for the player to take full advantage of the horse, it would need a place to run, to sprint, to jump. The team would need to find a way to create a big enough field for traversing on horseback, despite their space issues. They did away with using a hub world for the game, and would create a field that Link could travel through on foot or preferably on horseback. By adding the field, they changed how the Legend of Zelda would be played. It wasn't just about going from one room to the next, but about the act of traversing across a large landscape. Having Link on horseback was a huge technical achievement at the time that offered a novel way to experience the world. There was really nothing like it at the time, and it showed what the hardware could really do. Today, we've become bored of giant worlds with nothing in them, and rightly so. Here it was new and fresh. Back then, it seemed to be no end to how big the field was. Of course, that wasn't true, but the impact of Epona in the field could be felt not only in the future Zelda games, but in a wide variety of games, such as Shadow of the Colossus, Red Dead Redemption 2, The Witcher 3, and many, many more. Games that made traversing the landscape not a chore or a way to draw out the game, but a way to add an immersive experience. And yes, all those other games are far more advanced than Ocarina of Time. But Ocarina was the game that really showed us it could be done. But with the addition of a horse and a field, the scope of the game had to change. And what's the point of having a horse without interesting destinations? The field would be used for Link to access different locations that included such things as pristine waters for him to swim in, a desert with golden sand for him to get lost in, temples with dark secrets for him to battle in, and towns for him to socialize in. Because they weren't using a hub world, that meant everything had to get bigger. Instead of just having rooms, they needed entire towns that would give access to the game's many secrets and dungeons. The field may have been large, but they didn't want it to feel empty, so they hid secrets for the player to discover, enemies for them to battle. A day-night system was implemented in the field, and when the sun set upon Hyrule Field, skeletons would rise from the ground. All this gave Hyrule Field its own character and would ensure that the player's journey from one location to the next was just as important and exciting as the destination. But those destinations were not meticulously planned out before being built. The towns and villages that would make up the world of Hyrule started off as simple and empty, and over the development, the team at EAD would come together to suggest the things they would like to see occupy the space. And as they did, the towns evolved from boring empty spaces into vibrant areas filled with electric people teeming with life and designs that encouraged the players to explore. They may have added things because they thought it would look cool in the space, but it's all organized in such a way that each town has its own personality. Each town comes to life to become a character in its own right. But each place is more than what it seems at first glance. For instance, the Kakariko village appears to be a small town that's developing and expanding, but after you spend some time exploring and talking to its residents, you begin to realize that there's something very ominous living there. Throughout the game's playthrough, this ominous feeling would grow until you are faced with the realization that not something ominous, but evil has taken residence in this village. In fact, as you peek behind the veil of all these towns and villages, you start to uncover that Hyrule itself is not a magical kingdom from a child's fairy tale, but instead houses a great many secrets. A key part of any Zelda game are the dungeons, a place of special interest that the player needs to explore in order to complete the game. The dungeons in The Legend of Zelda are filled with enemies and puzzles, and oftentimes accessing the dungeon is a puzzle in of itself. One could even argue that the success of a Zelda game is dependent on how good the dungeons are.
The dungeons are horrifying, especially the water temple. Very confusing, very wet. Some people had me stuck in there for weeks.